Gotta say that again. About 4 feet off the ground, about 110 degrees, getting a reading of about 4 clicks. Yes, sir. Yeah, but excuse me. No, it's dying. No, it's dying. I think it's something other than the ground. I think it's something variable here. Tree right on. We just found the first night bird we've seen. We're about 150 or 200 yards from the site. Everything else is just deathly calm. There is no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. It's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird. It appears to be maybe moving a little bit this way. It's brighter than it has been. Yellow. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. Pieces of it are shooting off. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
Hi, and welcome to The Seeker
and The Skeptic.
I'm Kat, and I'm the flaky, unpredictable, maybe a bit irrational Seeker.
And I'm Rebecca. I'll be your sarcastic, grumpy, close-minded, skeptical host. Or maybe we should just be ourselves.
Sounds good to me. This podcast is going to dive deep into the controversial topics that some may call New Age, or woo-woo, or just plain foolish.
And hopefully look at them with a skeptical but open-minded approach that will encourage understanding and acceptance from both the skeptics
and the seekers.
This episode we're talking about UFOs, and I'm sure the question on all our listeners' minds is, who's Mulder and who's Scully?
Well, obviously you're Scully, you're the skeptic.
But Scully was a Catholic and a ginger.
And Fox Mulder, Rebecca Fox.
The truth is out there. Tweet us at Seeker Skeptic. Let us know what you think.
So today we're talking about UFOs, or unidentified flying objects, or the more recent term, AATs.
Ooh, what does that mean?
It means Advanced Aerospace Threats. And our case study is in Rendlesham Forest, which is basically the UK's Area 51. And some say they're the second most significant reported UFO sighting in history. So, Rebecca, what were your expectations when we headed into the woods?
Well, I mean, like you say, it's got this reputation as being England's Area 51. So my expectations were pretty high. I was like, this could be a genuine mystery. This could be something that I can't explain. So I was excited, but also a bit like concerned that it was going to be a really hard job as a skeptic to try and get to the bottom of this. So I'm also just looking forward to a walk in the woods because, as you know, any opportunity to walk into the woods. Generally, skeptics are skeptical about UFOs because there are a lot of hoaxes. There are a lot of people seeing weather balloons or Chinese lanterns and things. But belief in UFOs is pretty high. Apparently about 50% of the population believe in UFOs. Oh. And when I say believe in UFOs, they believe that UFOs are not mistakes. They believe that UFOs are something mysterious, whether that's government things or alien things. And that's what's really confusing. If you try and figure out how many people believe in UFOs, all the data's all mixed up, because when people say, yes, I believe in UFOs, you don't know whether they believe that the government's making secret airplanes, right, or whether they believe there's aliens.
And whether those aliens have come here or if they're out there.
Or whether they live in the hollow earth. You know, the list goes on. They could come from anywhere. But generally, I think I do believe in extraterrestrial life. We were talking yesterday about the Drake equation, which is actually more like a thought experiment because we don't know what numbers to put in it. But this guy, Drake, I assume, I can't even remember his first name. The Drake, the Drake of the Drake equation. So he came up with this equation, which is basically the number of civilizations in our galaxy that we can communicate will be equal to the rate of star formation times the fraction of stars that have planets, times the number of planets that could support life, times the number that actually develop life, times the number that created technology that allows them to be detected, times how long it takes them to release detectable signals. So that sounds like really improbable. And obviously the last four of those, we don't know what numbers to put into that equation. But if you consider how massive our universe is, right, actually he comes up with n equals, so n is the number of civilizations in our galaxy that we could potentially communicate with, 20.
What?
That's the numbers that Drake came up with. Ooh. But other people have used the same equation and come up with like 50,000.
Exactly.
So
right,
who knows really? But the possibility of there being life out there, I think, is very high. But even though there are cases that I can't explain, I I'm really, really sure, like I'd put money on the fact, before I went to Rendlesham, I would have put money on the fact that any UFO is probably not of alien origin.
Okay.
How about you?
Well, I've actually been interested in UFOs ever since I watched Men in Black, age 9. And definitely, you know, that great poster at the start of X-Files, I want to believe, like that describes me. This is one thing that I truly want to believe in. I find it hard to imagine that we're alone in the universe, and I kind of don't want to believe that either. But as for the reports, even I've been skeptical about these. I have heard reports from close friends, and my brother has seen a black triangle doing some weird stuff in the sky. And recently a friend told me about a noise disturbance that, I mean, I can't explain. Maybe you can. But anyway, the Rendlesham sightings, the fact that they were, like, you know, fairly close to home, I was excited, you know, to think that there could have been this big thing that happened there. And just, I guess, explore other possible explanations. But I'm
so you haven't had any sightings yourself, though? No.
Oh, and that's the other thing. So since we were going to the place, I was quite hopeful that we might see something weird.
Yeah. Although we were going right in the middle of summer, so the night is really short.
Yes.
So we would have had to stay up super late, and neither of us are really night
not
people.
Not going to happen. No, not even for aliens. Fuck that.
I've had a couple of sightings that I thought might have been UFOs at the time that I had them. I'll bring them up throughout the podcast,
please do.
as is my way. But I'll tell you about one, because I have a scar here it's like in the middle of my neck. What's it called? The clavicle.
And an alien did it.
An alien did it. Well, indirectly. I was a teenager and I was lying on my back on a picnic blanket with my friends, staring up at the night sky, smoking weed. And I saw something that I thought might be an alien, or might be a UFO. So I pointed at it and I dropped the joint on here. And then because I was stoned and confused and a teenager, I was nervous to flick it off because I didn't want to go onto the picnic blanket and start a fire.
Right.
So I left it there for longer than I should have, and it really hurt. And then I was like, oh, so it was only like a few seconds, but it was longer than you want a lit, a lit cigarette, basically, just on your skin. And now I have this lovely scar right in the middle of my neck. But I think probably, you know, it was just a plane.
Right.
And we were teenagers and we were stoned and we just freaked out, which I think might explain quite a lot of cases, but not the Rendlesham one, probably.
No.
They didn't sound like they were stoned.
Well, they could have been under the influence of something, but... So before going, we watched a documentary about the Rendlesham case. So this will sort of help us give a brief overview. If you don't know the story, here it is.
Oh, it's a proper legit documentary, which says by the History Channel.
It is, yeah.
For what that's worth, which is not much apparently, because apparently the A&E networks, who are the people who run the History Channel, they've been asked about the sort of content they've been putting on, because they do like ancient aliens and all that sort of stuff. And they did that thing about mermaids. Again, a bit dodgy on the old facts. So when interrogated about that, they said, at the end of the day, we're not an education resource, we're an entertainment brand.
Oh, man.
So the little thing saying history at the top of the screen.
It is technically history, right? Because somebody historically did report all of this
That's
stuff.
true.
All they're doing is reporting on it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was Christmas night, I think early the next day, the 26th of December. Lights were seen in an area... So Rendlesham Forest, it's close to... Well, two army bases are within it. 2 US army bases are there. And there were these people, the army folk, were having their Christmas party. So this is why I say they're probably under the influence of something.
Yeah.
Anyway, so these lights had been reported, and, thinking it might have been an aircraft, Officer Peniston, I can't remember.
Yeah, that is how you pronounce
James
it.
Peniston?
Jim, I think.
So we won't call him Penistown. And a couple of other officers or whatever go out to look. Peniston reports much later after the event that what they saw was a landed triangular craft, which appeared to have hieroglyphics or just some kind of strange, glyphs, basically, on the aircraft. And at the time, what was reported was just some unusual lights. So there is a lot of like kind of discrepancy between, what was reported at the time and what was reported later.
Yeah, that's the weird thing about this case generally. There's lots of like what was originally recorded and then what was recorded later. The documentary was confusing you that way as well, because it kept skipping between, and you weren't sure whether this was events as they were recorded at the time or events with the extra elaborations that have been made over the years. But so yeah, as you say, Penniston goes out, he with a few men, they see the strange lights, and then later he says on that same night he saw the craft and everything, and he claims to have made drawings at that time. He says he got close enough to draw it and he drew these things, and then it's all sort of forgotten. It's just like, well, that was just a thing that happened. But then a couple of nights later, they're partying again, because this is running up to New Year's now, so it's partying all the time. And there are strange lights seen again. And this time, they drag this guy, Colonel Holt, out to have a look. And he runs out, have a look, and he takes 4 men and some Geiger counters to see what's going on. And they bumble around in the woods. There's lots of other men there looking around to see if there's anything there. So it's obviously excited a lot of attention. There's definitely something that people are looking for. And he sends them all home and says, this is going to be a PR nightmare. You guys all go home. Me and my 4 trusted associates will go look. And they find a weird patch in the woodland where there are indentations, 3 indentations. In the documentary, it shows the indentations, recreates the indentations. And then it draws a line between them, so you can see that
it's clearly a triangle.
It's clearly a triangle, which is exactly what Penniston said, that he saw a triangular craft.
And
so
trees were broken, so it looked as if this big canopy of trees, like something had broken them away, come down through the trees. There were farm animals nearby.
Weirdly, there were farm animals in the forest.
It was confusing. There is a farm nearby at the time. There was an active working farm. So apparently they were all, the cows were mooing and going a bit crazy. And then apparently they suddenly go silent.
There's a sound like a woman screaming, which I think might be a munkjack deer, because if you've ever heard those, they're quite, especially at night in the woods, they're quite, or a woman screaming, possibly. So yeah, they wander around. Holt sees a strange small red light. And I think at this point, again, the story's a bit garbled. Even when it's being presented in a documentary, which you think would be helpful to inform us, we're still not sure what we saw. And I've watched it twice. So Holt says there's a strange small red light. It gets closer and it's oval, and it has molten metal dripping to the ground and a black center blinking like a giant eye at him. Then it explodes into 5 white lights and disappears.
Intense. They saw other lights in the sky as well, so different colours now,
moving around super fast, zipping about here and there. And one comes over and sends down a beam near Holt, and it hovers, and then it disappears again. So they all go back to the party, I guess.
Yeah, and it didn't get reported officially until I think 2 or 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks or something, after the actual date.
Which is weird, because when I had my UFO encounter, I told everyone about it immediately.
Right. I mean, I can see reasons why people didn't talk about it immediately, partly because it's bloody weird, right? That these are grown men, probably fairly skeptical, in theory. I can see why they wouldn't want to rush to talk about it. The problem with the fact that they reported it so late to government officials, the British MOD, was that then it wasn't taken seriously. It was it can't be that big a threat if you've waited this long to tell us. That there's a report to the British MOD says this is of no defence significance. So basically both sides, the British and the US armies, no one's looking into this now.
And the other thing is we don't know exactly what they reported at the time, because, as I say, the story's become elaborated over time. So I don't know if they told them that they'd seen a craft, or they just said they'd seen lights in the sky, or whether there was...
Yeah, and did those drawings, when did they get released?
Well, I think they were released in 94.
So look, that's 14 years after the case.
I think that's true. I mean, fact check me, please, listeners.
That's really
but I don't think that guy Penniston produced those drawings. And when I say produced, showed them to people.
Yeah.
Until much later, which, makes you wonder when exactly he drew them.
Right. Yeah.
So, Rendlesham's not that far from us. It's like a 3 or 4 hour drive. Mm-hmm. So we thought we'd just go drive over there and have a look, see what's going on, and also see what the local people think.
Yeah.
And the first person this is when we realise that we are terrible at interviewing people and generally talking to people.
It's not easy. 2 introverts here.
Yeah, so the first person I spoke to, Kat wasn't there, I went to the supermarket to pick up some bits and bobs. We'd settled down at our Airbnb near the scene. And I thought I'll start easy and work on the checkout lady. So my opening foray was, so my friend's really into UFOs. What do you guys think about that? Like, do people take that seriously around here? Because there was that thing in the forest. Just keeping it vague.
Yeah.
And I realised that it's a massively leading question because I've told her by asking that I don't think they're for real.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of encouraging her to agree with me.
Yeah.
She said some people take them seriously. She said, I guess seeing is believing, like with ghosts.
Okay.
And that's all I really got out of her. But yeah, she was agnostic, basically. I think maybe she didn't want to ruin our holiday. Because, if she thinks we've come here as UFO tourists and she's like, no, they're not real, then that could be quite disappointing.
British people are we're pretty polite and guarded. So I think trying to get information about what people believe, especially when it's something like UFOs, isn't easy.
Yeah. We had more luck with the second person we spoke to, though, at the post office in Orford, which is where we were staying, which is not very far away at all from Rendlesham. In fact, I can't remember exactly how far it is. It's only 10 minutes drive, though.
Yeah.
It's very close. We had some gentle chit-chat about wine choices because we were there to buy wine, eased him in. And then I can't remember exactly how we approached it, but we basically...
I think you said the same thing. It was the same line.
Did I?
Our friends... No, well, it was 2 of us and there were guys outside. So, our friends, they're the ones into UFOs. What do you think? And this guy was interesting. I believe, was it his father worked for the...
It could have been grandfather, I think.
Oh, yeah.
He said his granddad worked for the fire service
I think it was his dad,
at the time.
because it's only 1980.
Yeah, it could have been his dad.
But yeah.
Anyway, he was quite young, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
I've got granddad written in my notes, but I could be wrong. And this is interesting, actually, because this conversation we're having, we'll talk later about the fallibility of memory and about eyewitness accounts. We can't even remember what these people said to us. We're trying to take notes immediately afterwards. So anyway, some male relation of his worked for the fire service at the time of 1980, which is when this case happened. And he said that they were called out after the first sighting and had a look around and couldn't see anything but burnt trees.
Yeah.
Like the fire already gone.
Well, they were sent away.
Yeah.
They were sent away. That's definitely it's funny how I've kind of remembered that piece of information because it felt like, again, part of this kind of cover-up thing. You don't need to see this. This is a military thing. Let's keep this hush-hush.
But then why were they called out?
Somebody panicked.
It was weird, though, because in the documentary, there was nothing about burnt trees.
No.
But I have listened to lots of podcasts and read lots of accounts where people do mention burnt trees.
Ah.
But I've never, apart from this one guy at the post office with the story about his granddad, no one has told me that the fire service were called out. Police, yes, but fire, no.
That's interesting.
So I don't know whether this is just a bit of family legend that has become...
I don't know. I believe that guy.
Oh, no, I believe that he was telling what he believes to be the truth, for sure. He seemed like a nice guy. But, as we just said, people get confused and get things wrong, and we don't know if it was the granddad or the dad. And his dad or granddad could have been in the police service or slightly exaggerated something or changed something to make an entertaining story for his grandson. You know how these things happen. But he also said he was a believer, pretty much, wasn't he? Because he'd had an experience. He'd seen a triangle when he was young around Orford. And we should probably say Orford is an interesting place because they do military testing there. It's right on the coast. And there's this weird, I don't know how to describe it. It's little islands just off the coast, but they're attached little peninsulas, I think, that sort of come out. And they do all sorts of testing there. And there's big bits of kind of concrete debris. It looks kind of spooky and weird and definitely military-esque.
Yeah.
So there's that vibe to it. It's also an RSPB reserve. They have some amazing, oh my God.
Becca, this is not a bird conversation.
Okay, yeah, good point. I shouldn't go into the Avocet population there, but it's really quite stunning. Anyway, so this guy saw a black triangle when he was a kid around Orford, and he also said, which I haven't heard from anyone else, that at the time of Rendlesham Forest incident, there were EVPs. Is that EMPs?
Oh, yeah.
Electromagnetic pulses. He just said EMPs, and neither of us knew what that meant, but we just nodded.
Remember that.
But I looked it up later, and that caused cars to shut down.
Wow.
That was what he said. So I don't know whether he was saying that happened just then or it's happened It's like
frequently around that area. Which again, with all the military stuff, like we don't know what those guys are doing.
Yeah. So he was probably our best reference. I had another chat to when I went out to a bit of a museum just a little while down the coast. It was like 40 minutes away, but I thought, well, I'll ask the lady at the gift shop anyway, see if she knows. And she was very dismissive of it. She was like, yeah, they take it seriously over there.
Oh, interesting.
This gives you a sense of like how small England is, that something 40 minutes drive away, and as far as she's concerned, it's like another world. She said they have their own ghost stories. And then she went on to tell me some interesting stuff about mermaids. But that's another story.
Okay.
And then the next day we went to the woods.
Yeah. So we went there's a trail. There is a UFO trail. It's clearly marked. They're kind of capitalizing on it, but there's no gift shop. They could be doing more.
Yeah, I was disappointed at the lack of gift shop.
It's a pretty like gentle walk. I didn't complain too much.
It was disappointing, I thought, because I love going out walking in the woods. It's one of my favorite activities. But these are since the Great Storm in 1987.
Yes.
Yeah. And there was this big storm, and everyone in the UK over a certain age knows about it, and everyone under a certain age gets told about it by every old person they meet when you're out hiking.
You know that great storm.
Exactly. Yeah. So that whole area of the woodland was destroyed by that storm, and they've replanted all pines in like nice straight lines. So it doesn't really feel like walking through a wood.
No, it's just like a manicured forest garden.
Yeah, and it's hard to get a sense of
what it was like.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think even in that documentary we watched, they say, the forest now is nothing like it was back then. So, yeah.
I mean, generally, forests are scary, especially at night. I've camped in many forests, and because it gets darker sooner because of the tree cover and the weird shapes of all the different trees, because they're all different, not just all pines in neat little rows. They're all like, everything's twisting in together, and there's animals moving around, and it's a very spooky place to be at night, especially if it's unfamiliar to you because it's not your local woodland.
Sure.
So these are American soldiers wandering around in the strange, creepy, dark wood at night.
Slightly pissed. Yeah.
Slightly pissed, exactly. That's a perfect scenario to get spooked out about something. Yeah. But the trail was good. There were like 5 stops on it, and they talked us through what was seen. They had pictures of the drawings that were drawn, and the climax of the trail, though, was a model replica of the UFO that Jim Pennison saw.
Which is pretty cool.
It was amazing.
I mean, it's big. It's about like, I think 9-10 feet.
Yeah, about the size of a car.
Yeah.
Small car.
Oh, no, I would say it's much bigger than that, but like, okay.
Eyewitness testimony.
Right.
Well, we'll put a photo up on Instagram. I've got a photo with Kat for reference. She's the size of a normal human being. So you can work it out from that.
And I thought that was pretty fun. We stayed there for a little bit. We talked to a couple of people.
Well, the plan was, we spoke to someone and they weren't very forthcoming, and then they went away. So I thought, let's just sit here next to the UFO and someone else will come and then we could talk to them. Perfect. It'll be like, we'll lie in wait, basically, for the people. But it didn't occur to me how we'd look from the outside, because we were just sort of crouching down at the edge of a clearing by a UFO.
Like a lot of people, you just go and see this thing, you walk around it. It's kind of a big deal, but it's not really. People aren't like, we took a family photo of some people, but you don't hover there for a long time. So we must have looked quite strange.
Well, that woman said there was some kids, and she was in a family with some kids, and she was like, "Oh, please be quiet. These ladies are trying to soak up the ambience of the UFO."
Alienness.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. They're trying to soak up the alienness.
Yeah.
And then I thought we should have brought candles.
Right.
And then we got embarrassed and rushed off. And we did get a chance to talk to that bicycle man. That's how he's referred to in my notes, bicycle man. He seemed quite into the whole government angle.
Yes. Yeah, he was definitely a believer.
He said that it was covered up until the 1990s when the X-Files made UFOs popular and people were talking about them again. And they were forced by that cultural interest to release data about it. And he reckons, and this is very similar, and in fact, this is the guy in the post office said the same. He thinks something happened, but it wasn't aliens. Could have been some kind of government technology. Yeah. But he did speculate. So I was like, oh, it's interesting, like the amount of reports and stuff, like, what do you think is going on there? Like there are lots of people around and yet only a few people see the UFOs. Why do you think that is? And he speculated that what if everyone who actually sees a UFO disappears?
Yeah, I thought that was good. It's like, well, can't argue with that.
Yeah, exactly. That's a very convenient argument. Although we'd expect to see more disappeared people, I suppose.
More reports. But even those people, if they're reporting disappear, the population crisis would not suggest that that is happening.
Well, the aliens are very worried about the population crisis. Some of them are. The good aliens are.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah,
shortly.
so that would be a good solution for them.
Yeah. So we saw all the sites. We saw the East Gate, which is where apparently the men rushed out of to see the aliens.
So they saw the lights in the sky, and then they're like, oh my goodness, that could be a down plane. They rush out the East Gates, and they're in the forest, which would have been crazy overgrown and spooky. See lights. One of them claims later to have seen the thing. Mm-hmm. Then 2 nights later, sorry, I'm repeating this because it's so hard to get straight in your head. Yeah. Then 2 nights later, some other people also rush out the East Gates.
Right.
A group of them. And one of them claims to have seen the big eye looking at him, and that's Colonel Holt.
Yes.
So, it's really weird how one of the reasons this is kind of sold as such a big, impressive case is because so many people witnessed this thing. But you get down to it, it's 2 guys.
Right, and very little evidence of reports of from the time. That's just like a weird detail. Anyway,
yeah. So we went and talked to the forest rangers.
Yes.
We thought they'd have some info.
And we were told that they have had reports of lights being spotted since then, because a lot of people do visit this area for that reason. But nothing more than lights, I think, in the history since 1980. That forest ranger doesn't personally believe in aliens, or it was aliens, but nor does he think it was the lighthouse. So there is something called the Orford Lighthouse, which is, how far away is it?
That is on the Orford Ness. That's part of that area I was telling you about, where there's like the peninsula with all the military testing area.
Right.
It's right there. Unfortunately, it was decommissioned in like 93, I think. So we couldn't actually check to see what it looks like.
Yeah.
But it definitely does shine into the forest. So he said that the Orford Lighthouse couldn't explain everything that was seen, which I agree with. There was some stuff that definitely couldn't explain, like seeing the craft. But it is directly in the eye line of where they were looking at. And if you'd come round, and I'll just get Kat to come round to my desk and have a look at my computer. I have a picture here. This is from before the lighthouse was decommissioned. That light on the right is the lighthouse. That's from the place we were in the forest.
And
you could definitely see it.
And it would have been moving because it's a lighthouse.
Exactly. It's rotating around, so it would have appeared to move. In this photo, it doesn't look like it's on the ground, because it's not on the ground. It's at the top of a lighthouse. So you could see how that would look like a light moving through the woods, which is one of the things that was reported.
Yeah.
But yeah, this guy said, and he's right, that the lighthouse doesn't explain everything. And he was of the opinion that it was probably some kind of government
testing thing. The government were doing something and they don't want everyone to know about it. I mean, we'll talk more about government theories in a bit.
He also said, interesting, another grandfather story. Maybe this is why I think that the guy at the post office is a granddad. Yeah, maybe I've merged those 2 memories. So his granddad was the one who came up with the idea of the UFO trail that we went on. Apparently they had some lottery funding, and the granddad was just like, as a bit of a joke, hey, why don't we do a UFO trail? Yeah. And someone was like, oh, that's a good idea. That would get some more people around the forest. And they set it up. So that's got a weird little origin story for this trail, which seems pretty popular.
So yeah, after that whole experience, did that change your mind about Rendlesham at all?
Well, Kat had this brilliant idea. Don't sell yourself short. Don't move on. To go talk to the local mind, body, spirit type community.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
So we popped into this crystal shop because we thought that would be guaranteed to be good. And also Kat wanted to pick up some crystals, so it was convenient. And unfortunately, the woman who ran the crystal shop wasn't there. Only her slightly grumpy husband was there running the shop for the day.
Man, he was like, it was like getting water out of a rock.
It really was. He did not want to talk to us about UFOs. But he did say, validating your theory, that if his wife was there, she would have talked to us about UFOs for hours.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting. So there is a crossover there. The mind, body, spirit type people, the sort of people who'd be shopping a crystal shop, are interested in UFOs around that area. But he wasn't having any of it. Right. Did have a nice chat about the nature and the wildlife of the area. And the birds, obviously.
He must have been the skeptic. She was the seeker.
Yeah. So yeah, what do you think? Like, did going and seeing it for yourself change the way you thought about the case?
I was a little bit more disappointed. I guess I was hoping that the people of Rendlesham had other stories to tell us, that they were more enthusiastic, that, like, you know, we might have seen some weird photos or had more stories, but we really didn't have anything, like, nothing added to our documentary watching, I guess.
I feel like this is a problem generally with British people. Like you said, like, no one wants to talk about this stuff. They know it's embarrassing. Like, I think if we went to an American place where, I'm trying to think of an example apart from Roswell, but I can't think of one. But if we went somewhere that was famous for Bigfoot sightings, for example, probably every person would have a local legend to tell us.
Right. I got someone else. Yeah, we'll have to do a Bigfoot hunt.
Oh, that'd be amazing. Yeah. Oh, I'd love to go Bigfoot hunting. But yeah, anyway, like, no one really had that many stories, and everyone was very cagey about, they obviously didn't want to be seen as silly.
Yeah. Poor UFOs getting this stigma. So I guess we can talk about the history of UFO sightings. Should we move on to that?
Yes, but first,
this show has already taken us to some strange places, literally and metaphysically, and we love making it for you.
if you enjoy listening and have $1 a month to spare, we'd appreciate your support on Patreon.
Patreon is a platform for supporting content creators like us.
If you pledge $1 a month, we'll spend it on boring things like hosting fees and audio equipment.
And fun things like psychic readings, crystal healing, ayahuasca retreats.
Yeah, we'll spend it on drugs.
There are lots of adventures we'd like to go on, so if you want us to go hunting for the Loch Ness Monster, visit a haunted castle or Area 51, you're going to have to chip in.
We think having conversations about this stuff, paranormal, spiritual, weird stuff, is really important, especially between people who don't agree. Having these experiences is fun, doing the research is interesting, but the most important thing is the conversations.
We hope listening to our podcast will inspire you to start talking to people you would normally dismiss as grumpy old skeptics.
Or flaky woo-woo seekers.
If you think these sorts of conversations are important too, you can support us on Patreon. And as a supporter, for as little as $1, you'll be able to vote on upcoming show ideas.
And if there's something you're desperate for us to look into, whether it's acupuncture or vampires, Patreon supporters' requests will always go to the top of our consideration list.
Find out more at patreon.com/Seeker Skeptic. And that's Patreon spelt Patreon.
Okay, so you can't really separate the history of UFOs from the history of sci-fi. That's what I found when I started reading around this. And I mean, that could be because the UFOs are inspiring sci-fi narratives, or it could be, if you're more of a skeptic, the other way around. So the first reported airships, which is what they were started to be called, which look kind of close to what we think of as modern UFOs, they appeared in sci-fi in the late 1800s, and they were called airships. Large, cigar-shaped things, look like blimps. They had propellers and like fin-like wings, so then they're not the sort of thing that could actually go into space, but for the people of the time, they're very futuristic sci-fi type things. There's a book called Robert le Conqueror by Jules Verne, which came out in 1886, and that was started a lot of excitement about this topic. And it's a really cool story because it's like one of those mystery stories, like sci-fi mystery, like strange lights and sounds all over the world. What's going on? No one knows what's going on. Everyone's talking about it. And then a mysterious black flag with gold suns appears on all the pyramids and the Statue of Liberty and all the big monuments of the world, like the aliens are marking their space. And then the story goes on and you find out, I won't spoil it for you. But anyway, so that idea of there being these mysterious airships out there from Jules Verne, and then because of the way that pop sci-fi writers worked at the time, all these pulp authors started picking up that story and telling their own little mini. So suddenly it was like a big deal to be talking about these mysterious flying crafts. But aliens look very different back then to how we conceive of them now. So in 1897, you have War of the Worlds with these octopus spider-like aliens. You must have seen War of the Worlds.
No.
Really?
I know.
Well, the recent movie, not recent at all, recent in my mind, the Tom Cruise movie, you get to see what the aliens. I wouldn't recommend it, but there is a really good musical, which I would recommend. Okay. It's like a radio play. Anyway, the point is, they don't look like Greys or like Pleiadians or Reptiloids, our favourite, the trilogy of aliens. They look like these bizarre octopusy type huge things.
More like sea creatures. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this is it's really interesting because you often see something in sci-fi and then you see it start to appear in actual people's sightings.
Yeah.
So the first flying saucer pops up in 1947 and it's not a flying saucer. There's a pilot called Kenneth Arnold. I think we talked about him on a previous episode. He reported seeing 9 objects resembling boomerangs in the sky, but he said they moved like saucers skipping over water. And then some reporter picked that up and called them flying saucers. And everyone assumed then that they were disc-shaped. But what he'd see wasn't disc-shaped at all. It's weird how these stories get twisted. In 1951, we have Nordics, which is, if you listen to our episode from one of our Glastonbury episodes, the Pleiadians, those that Sven knows and loves, that's the Nordics. They're tall, attractive, humanoid. They like to have sex with us. They're lovely, and they want us peace and love. And they have they have this whole relationship with people where people like Sven can like channel them and speak for them and stuff. So they're great. We all love the Nordics. No problem with them. They turn up in 1951, and then in 1953, the term UFO is coined by the US Air Force as a catch-all term for anything of that we don't know what it is.
Unidentified and
Exactly.
flying.
Yeah. And then, so up to that point, all we have is these disc-shaped crafts and the nice blonde aliens. But then, in 1964, an episode of The Outer Limits comes out called The Bolero Shield, which we watched last night. And that's the first instance in sci-fi of something that looks like what we think of as a grey. It's small, has no hair, it's got kind of big eyes, although they're not black.
And like a bulbous head, like particularly big head.
Exactly. And that's a great episode of The Outer Limits. You should watch it yourselves.
Yeah,
very camp, bizarre. Yeah. That came out a few days before this very famous UFO case. It didn't actually come out before the case. So Betty and Barney Hill are a couple who reported the first, what we think of as a classic abduction narrative. They were out driving, the car stopped, they saw strange lights, then they were taken, or originally, again, like with the Rendlesham thing, the story changes. So they saw the strange lights, they lost time, but then later they go back for a hypnotic regression, and they find out that during that lost time, they were aboard a spaceship and had experiments done to them and stuff. Yep. Interestingly, that episode of The Outer Limits came out like the weekend before they had their first hypnotic regression session.
Wow.
Before they had that regression, Betty was talking about the aliens as having short black hair. They were all men and they had big noses.
Huh.
But then they go for the regression after that episode and they're describing something that looks very similar to what we see in that episode of The Outer Limits.
Wow.
I'm not saying that, they're making it up. I think this is how our brains work. Like, you get seeded with ideas from media, especially when it's very evocative and it's, important to you. They're sci-fi fans. They're watching this episode. We don't know. I mean, I'm saying they're watching this episode. We don't know if they watched this episode. Right. In fact, they say they didn't. They don't know what The Outer Limits is, which sounds a bit fishy because I know what it is. And it's not even on television for
I haven't seen War of the Worlds, but I know Outer Limits. So, yeah.
Anyway, so that's interesting because now 43%, according to Wikipedia, of reported alien encounters are with greys, and then the others are with the Pleiadians and the reptiloids. The first reptiloids turn up in 1984 in a TV series called V, which was remade. I think the remake was quite good, but I don't remember clearly. So, buyer beware. So they were like serpent men in older fiction. We've always had, humans have always been scared of snakes. Rightly so, they're scary. And there's some mention of like serpent lizard people in Theosophy. But V mainstreamed it and put it on everyone's TVs. And suddenly reptiloids were a thing, the third type of aliens. And then we have, coming up to modern day, in my mind, because I still live in the 90s apparently, we have the X-Files in 1993. And that's what really got the whole, oh my God, the government is in league with aliens thing going. There's been quite a lot of writing about how the X-Files either created or perpetuated or just like solidified a general sort of sense of paranoia about what the government and whether it's actually good for our society. But I think it's great for our society because I love the X-Files and I won't hear anything bad said about it. Anyway, and now we're in the situation where suddenly, because of the explosion of the internet, it's not like we don't get told what to see or what to believe by films anymore. Filmmakers are going to the internet and digging through Reddit and finding interesting little stories.
Yeah.
So that it's much more cross-pollinated.
One feeds the other and yeah.
Exactly. So I think that's going to really change the stories we hear about aliens, and who knows where it goes next. But yeah, that's kind of up to the one point. There's this thing called the availability heuristic, which is basically, if it's available at the top of your mind, then you will reach for that explanation for something.
Right.
So if something's out there, like, for example, what greys look like, and you're under hypnosis being asked what you saw when you were in the alien spaceship, you will describe the first thing that is available in your mind. It's not just in the case of UFOs, right? It's all across the board.
That's
it's what
how
we do.
our minds work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what's out there in the media and in film and TV, whatever, really influences what we see. And I think that's what you see in the history of UFOs. And I think it's fascinating, actually. I was surprised at how interesting I found it.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk more about the psychology in a bit. And actually, that was the first place I kind of ended up looking when I was looking at what were the reports of aliens before the 1960s. What were we, even like before the 1900s, really. So I was looking at Jung's book on like flying saucers, basically. So yeah, that was another. I just had to go to Carl Jung straight away.
When did that come out? Do you know?
That was. It's either the late 1950s, or the early 1960s.
Yeah. So it's 1947, the time when the term flying saucer was coined.
Yeah, he'd been studying it for at least 10 years by the time he wrote this
Interesting.
book.
Okay, cool.
But anyway, in the book, we'll talk more about the psychology stuff that he said later, but he has some pictures of some broadsheets from the 1500s. One was from 1561, and this features, and I'll put the images in the show notes at seekerandskeptic.com. But basically, it shows a very frightful spectacle reported by numerous men and women. They saw globes of a blood red, bluish, or black colour, or plates, in large numbers near the sun. Some were 3 in a row, then 4 shaped like a square. Some were just on their own. And amongst these globes were some blood-coloured crosses. It sounds very unlike UFO reports today, really. There were also 2 great tubes. I mean, it's kind of crazy.
This is all in the sky at the same time?
Yeah, and
wow.
Then they all fell from the sky and fell down to Earth. Then everything appears on fire, and slowly that fades away into the Earth, producing a lot of steam.
Weird.
Really, really weird. And that was 1561, in Nuremberg. Okay, so I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. The other one was 1566, so 5 years later. And here, many large black globes were seen in the air, moving before the sun with great speed and turning against each other as if fighting. Some of them became red and fiery and afterwards faded and went out.
And he's just referring to the newspapers.
Yeah, and there are images, like really hilarious, like drawings.
What's with all the drawings? As soon as we started looking into UFOs, I was like, I'm looking at a lot of pencil sketches of weird things.
Yeah. Yeah, so anyway, that kind of surprised me that there have been reports way back, 1500s. I also did some research on aliens in the Bible.
Of course you did.
I went to my 2 great sources of information, Carl Jung and the Bible. But I actually didn't find a whole lot. What was really interesting is the diversity in beliefs around this. A lot of kind of go-to internet Christians, evangelists were saying, nope, no aliens in the Bible. Nope, don't even think about it. God didn't make those. Nope. But in other cases, you get these quotes mostly from Ezekiel and Genesis. I don't really know how to quote Bible passages, but I'll just read out a little bit from Ezekiel 1:4, whatever that means. I looked and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal. And then there's a bit more about what these creatures were like. Each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, their feet were like those of a calf and gleamed like burnished bronze. Again, kind of strange.
That's very strange.
Not super close to, the flying saucers or the greys. And in Genesis, that's when we get mention of the Nephilim. The Nephilim were on Earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. Basically, these Nephilim seem to be thought of as either giants or fallen angels. They were watchers of the earth that God ultimately got sick of and drowned or buried in the Great Flood.
It's a bit harsh.
And others think that these were the things that visit Earth today.
Well, they were tall and attractive.
Yes.
And wanted to have sex with us.
Basically.
There you go.
Those are the
Pleiadians.
Exactly. And I think the book really to look at, which I did not, but I want to, is Chariots of the Gods, well-known book about this.
Well, I think that goes more into the ancient aliens type stuff.
Yes,
which we should do a separate show about because it's fascinating.
Exactly. I mean, I'm only going to touch on this stuff now, but we will totally do this properly in the future. Then you've got the Anunnaki theory. So there's a book called The Earth Chronicles by Zechariah Sitchin, and this revolves around the interpretation of ancient Sumerian and Middle Eastern texts, looking at megalithic sites and artifacts from all around the world. So Sitchin hypothesizes, is that the right word? That the gods of old Mesopotamia were actually astronauts from the planet Nibiru, which he believed to be a remote 12th planet. So counting...
So out
sun,
beyond
moon,
Pluto.
And counting the sun and moon as planets as well. And he associated this with the god Marduk. And he argues that there are Sumerian texts which tell the story that 50 of these Anunnaki, these aliens, came to Earth approximately 400,000 years ago with the intent of mining our raw materials, especially gold, and taking them back to Nibiru. And basically, they got tired and ultimately genetically engineered labourers to work in their mines. And after some trial and error, they eventually created us. Or like at least, like the model human. And yeah, basically Sitchin concludes that the Anunnaki was still involved here on Earth until their culture was destroyed in the last ice age, 12,000 years ago. And seeing that the humans have survived, though, that ice age, they left the Earth, but gave us the opportunity to kind of, govern the Earth by ourselves.
Oh, that's nice of them.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, Stitchin's work has been, criticised.
Just a little bit.
And then some other little factoids, or not really factoids, more like theories. Probably shouldn't call them facts. This idea that, the ancient cultures, the ancient Egyptians, some Native Americans, they artificially lengthened the skulls of their children. Which I think we do have evidence of these skulls. The theory, though, is that this was done to either emulate extraterrestrial visitors, whom they may have seen as gods, whereas others might be actual aliens, because, greys are described by many abductees as having similarly shaped long skulls.
Yes, but it's like foot binding, isn't it? When you're a child, your skull's kind of soft, and they can wrap bits of cloth really tightly around, and then they get these weird, like, sort of conical heads.
I mean, it's a real shame that my parents didn't bother, experimenting.
You'd look great as a cone head.
I agree. Yeah. They had 3 other regular kids. They could have just let the ginger alien. And also, obviously, the program Ancient Aliens, it suggested that the owners of the biggest of the lengthened skulls may be like human extraterrestrial hybrids. So it's a kind of cross between the two. There's also the questions about, and I genuinely have this question, who drew the Nazca lines? They're so large that they had to have been mapped from the sky, but they didn't have that technology back then. Is that
true?
Yeah,
they had to be mapped by the
Rebecca,
sky?
tell me, how would you have drawn, like...
How would I draw a straight line in the desert without going up in the sky?
No, but like the ones with... I'm thinking about the man with the hat and all of those people.
Yeah, but they're basically... I mean, you'd have the design, right?
Mm.
And then you'd maybe like draw it on a piece of paper or something.
Yeah.
And then you'd be like, okay, I need to go in a straight line for so far, and then I need to turn right and go in a straight line.
I don't know.
And then you'd put it together. I don't think it would be that hard. I mean, they are very impressive.
Or maybe we should try it.
But I don't think you need to go up into the sky just to draw something on a flat piece of ground. And also, it's not like they're photorealistic. So if you get something a bit wrong, it doesn't really matter, does it? It's just part of the style.
Okay, that's not too bad. Well, what about The massive heads of Easter Island.
Yeah, they're weird.
They're weird, right?
They're definitely weird, but I mean, they're just big bits of stone with faces carved in them.
Yeah, but they're like alien faces.
They're like, well, this is the thing. This is what I find so weird about a lot of the ancient alien stuff. Like, people in ancient times had their own artistic styles, right? We don't look at Picasso and go, oh, that doesn't look like a human, it must be an alien.
Oh, I think Picasso
we think
was
that's
an
his
alien.
style. You heard it here first. Picasso
That's my next
was an
theory.
alien. It's like we don't credit ancient people with having their own style.
Yeah, I see that. And like also, even though that technology doesn't seem to have, we don't have any evidence of any amazing technology, a lot of things would have been destroyed. You don't need to create aliens to explain really excellent crafts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Especially the pyramids. Like, often you hear from the ancient alien people, oh, there's no way that they could have done it. No one could explain it. Like, have you ever talked to an Egyptologist? Because they can explain it.
Right.
You can't explain it. The general public can't explain it because it's, it's complicated and hard to get your head around. But people who are actually experts in this field know how it's done.
Well, speaking of explanations.
The first explanation that people have is that they're, for the UFO phenomenon, is there a literal physical craft coming from some other planet like Nauru or somewhere else, coming to our world and then putting literal physical little beings down to interact with us. That's what's called the nuts and bolts explanation, because they're made of nuts and bolts, not of like, I don't know, ectoplasm or interdimensional rays or anything like that. They are literally made of nuts and bolts. What I really like about Ancient Aliens, actually, and this is kind of like a little game we play when we watch it, is at the beginning, questions come up like, where do they come from? How do they get here? When are they coming back? Do they really like us? Do they have our best? Like, they have all these questions and they sort of float up on the screen. And I consider them as like prompts for what to think about when you watch the show. And we like to assign everyone watching one of the prompts. So at the end, you can give a short presentation on what you've learned from that episode of Ancient Aliens. It's more fun than it sounds. So that's what I'm going to do with this. I've got 3 questions. Where do they come from? How do they get here? What do they want? So first, where do they come from? It depends which aliens we're talking about. And as I said before, there are 3 types. You got the Pleiadians, they're the tall, blonde, sexy ones. You got the Greys, they're small, got no hair, weird big eyes. And then you've got the Reptiloids. We don't like them, mentioned on the David Icke episode extensively. So David Icke reckons that Greys come from the Andromeda galaxy. And Reptiloids come from Alpha Draconis, obviously, Draco. And there is some speculation online that David Icke himself is a Pleiadian.
Oh, okay. I can see it.
You can see it. He was blonde, wasn't he, when he was younger?
Very attractive.
Yeah, there you go. Charming. Wants to have sex with us, I assume. So the point is, that's just David Icke's theory, and we're going to take him as the expert because we obviously respect his opinion highly. So that's his theory. But the point is that everyone says they come from far, far away. And the more we discover about our galaxy, the further away they come from. So we used to talk about Martians. Now we don't talk about Martians because we know what's up on Mars. It gets over into the next galaxy. It just gets further and further. Because our universe is expanding, the spaces in between everywhere are getting bigger. So it's traversing that distance to get to visit us and, abduct us and look at our cows or whatever they like to do. It's getting harder and harder. So if they want to come visit us, they should get a move on, really, if they haven't already, because it's only going to get harder over time.
My only problem with that is, like, how could we possibly imagine their technology?
Yeah.
Like, it seems so like, because we can't reach them, they surely can't reach us. It's like, you have no idea what's capable in other
That's true,
planets.
But if we imagine that they are nuts and bolts craft,
sure,
which is what we're going with,
right,
then space is always going to be an issue.
Yeah.
Maybe they found some workaround. In fact, that kind of brings me on to the next question, which is, how do they get here?
Yeah.
So the most popular theory that's sort of popping around now is that they use some kind of anti-gravity device. So this is not just opposing gravity, because we all do that when we stand up, you're opposing gravity, but cancelling it. So probably the most famous one that people are talking about right now is Cavorite, which is Cavorite is a made-up thing from H.G. Wells' story, The First Men in the Moon, from 1900. But Bob Lazar's element 115 is totally not made up according to him, although it has many of the same properties as cavorite.
Hang on, it was discovered. It was actually...
Yeah, but what he claims it does, that's the bit that I have a problem with. Yeah, you're right. There is an element called moscovium, which is a real element. But he claims that his element 115 creates gravity waves.
Right.
Don't know if that's true. Who could tell? But the theory with cavorite from H.G. Wells' story is that it makes the air above it weightless and then it shoots off into space, and that's how they propel themselves through space, which is so similar to what Bob Lazar is saying, which could just be a coincidence, but it's interesting. So that's how they get here. The last question is, what do they want? And again, this depends on which alien. So, I mean, this is a good test. You know what they want. What does the Pleiadians want?
To have sex with us.
Yeah. And they want to encourage us to be nice.
Yeah.
And
they want the best
save
for
the
us.
world.
Right.
Yeah. They're all poly. They're all so if you're in a Pleiadian civilization, this is from floatingworld.org. This is a quote about the sexual practices of the Pleiadians, which for some reason I seem to have a bit of an interest in. If you're in a Pleiadian civilization, the expression of love and sexuality at that moment is literally so complete and balanced and whole that there is no need to attach themselves to the other person and drag them down through eternity.
Wow.
This seems like quite a lot of bitter people. I mean,
right.
Generally poly people are kind of cool and relaxed, but this just sounds like people who are a bit bitter about being forced into monogamy.
People are commitment-ophobes, I guess.
Yeah, and they fantasize this like civilization where you won't be dragged down through eternity by your horrible husband Steve.
Basically just swinging around.
Yeah. So that's the Pleiadians. The Greys, they experiment on us. They take our genetic material. They maybe steal our souls.
Yeah. I mean, but they do seem kind of neutral, right?
Yeah, we don't really know what they want, why they're doing these things.
Yeah, they're like observers. They're like the neutral observers.
Yeah. This is, I mean, probably the most famous image of a Grey is from the front cover of Whitley Strieber's Communion, which is an amazing book. I would recommend everyone read it. And actually, don't read the book. Throw the book in a fire and watch the documentary. Because, not the documentary. The movie.
Freudian.
Although there's an interesting story about that, because I think Communion originally...
Telling everyone that it's a documentary.
Yeah. Communion originally was released as non-fiction and went to like the top of the non-fiction charts in the New York Times.
Wow, no way.
And then, I can't remember the details, I'm just talking off the top of my head now. And then they re-released it or reissued it as fiction, and then it also went to the top of the charts as that. So this is a book written by Whitley Strieber, who's an amazing horror author. He wrote loads of great sort of short novels about vampires and stuff. I was really into them as a teenager. And he wrote Communion at some point, I don't know whether before or after the vampires. And it was supposed to be his account of what happened to him. So he was one of the people who had that classic abduction experience. He was taken aboard their ship. They probed him. They did all sorts of horrible things. And then it got very, very weird and surreal. And yeah, it's... Just go see the movie. It's worth seeing the movie. Okay. But what's really disturbing about it is the way he talks about how he was basically like raped. So he says, on that night in 1985, a device called an electroejaculator was forced into my rectum, tearing it on the left side. Jesus. At that time, I had no idea what was happening to me or why. In the context of such a horrific experience, I would suddenly have an erection. Then I experienced ejaculation and watched helplessly as what I can only describe as a monster collected my ejaculate and took it away. That is traumatic.
Right.
I mean, he's one of these people who's been through those repressed memory hypnosis sessions. So as a skeptic, I can only assume that these memories have been twisted and distorted or perhaps completely invented through the process, because we know that that repressed kind of memory therapy is a good place to seed ideas and to like... So
even accidentally.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's intentional probably on the part of the therapist or the person, but it's just something that happens because humans like to make up stories. But he believes that this horrible thing happened to him. And now it makes me see, every time we joke about rectal probes or anal probing, it makes me see that in a completely different light.
Sure.
Because there are people out there who think that's actually happened to them.
Yeah.
And we're all laughing about it when it's on South Park.
Right.
So that's from a piece that Whitley Strieber wrote. I'll put it in the show notes, called The Anguish and Pain of My Rape. And he talks about how he's been mocked and humiliated for reporting this experience ever since. So sorry to be such a downer, but these are real people.
Yeah,
you know?
and I this is the thing which comes up a lot when I'm reading these abduction stories. I believe that they are saying what they believe to have experienced. What the actual cause is, that's harder to really determine, but if somebody actually believes that to be true, I mean, it's basically the same as the real thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It's horrible. So that's the Greys. We don't know what they're up to, but people are scared of them, basically. In fact, Whitley Strieber, even in the movie of Communion, I think there's like a positive spin on it at the end.
Yeah, and it's meant to be, even the title is meant to be kind of like trying to put a positive spin on it.
Yeah, so he doesn't necessarily think all the aliens are evil, but he did experience this. He has the memory of experiencing this horrible thing. So the reptiloids, last on our list.
They're bad news. They want to... I thought those were the soul stealers. Maybe I'm getting that
I think
wrong.
they do that too, yeah.
Because they want to feed off our... Fear, that's it.
Yeah, that's what they want. They enslave us. They put us in the Matrix, which is basically
reality. What we call reality.
Yeah, and then they rig up the Matrix, so we're constantly scared and constantly questioning ourselves, and then they just gobble up all that fear. They love it. They keep. I mean, you can listen to our David Icke episode if you want to know more about what they're up to. It's very worrying. So that's it. That's what they want. That's how they get here and where they come from, and that's the basis of the nuts and bolts explanation for what aliens are.
Thank you for enlightening us. I have some supernatural explanations. So, this is less nuts and bolts.
More ectoplasm.
Yeah, more ectoplasm. So the interdimensional hypothesis, or IDH, is the idea that people like Jacques Vallée, he's a ufologist, says that these UFOs and related events are coming from other realities or other dimensions that exist separately alongside our own. It's also thought that these phenomenon has existed for a long time, just taking other forms, often ascribed to mythological or supernatural creatures. So I guess like unicorns. They all come from other dimensions, according to this.
And Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Bigfoot's interdimensional now.
Absolutely.
They say when there's not enough space in the forest, Bigfoot will roam quantum space. I mean, they don't say that. I say that.
It would be quite nice if we could do that too, because at some point we're going to need to. Hilary Evans, who's another researcher into UFOs, argues that if the other dimension is slightly more advanced than ours, or is in our own future, this would explain the UFO's tendency to represent kind of future technologies. So airships in the 1890s, they obviously kind of came later, it's airplanes. Rockets and supersonic travel in the 1940s, and they came later. So it's always like they're just like a few steps ahead of us.
Yeah, which she's saying that's because in the other dimension it is a couple of steps ahead of us. Yes. But is it like our same dimension, or is it like humans from the future? Or
that's one theory.
Okay.
So that's all I've really got. I also just wanted to... I was watching the Alex Jones interview on the Joe Rogan show, and I was trying to kind of get like a good like soundbite, but this is what I got.
Do the voice.
No, our bodies are
that's pretty
Our bodies are a communal hive organism. It's an electrochemical antennae that connects us with and our ancestors. It's in us all, or all in us. There are the good ones and the bad ones. It goes back to the Druids, the Mesoamericans, bad things that looked like elves with horns, and good things that aren't connected with us, who don't contact us unless we contact them. The Nazis were possessed by these evil elves. Like, none of that makes any sense, I'm fully aware, but it was just like a flavour of these other dimensional things that we can kind of access psychically.
Yeah.
And
we talked before about the kind of the Christian side of it, but that's also kind of into like demons. Are they from the? I don't know whether they're from the same dimension.
I think you could tie those in too. I mean, again, these are all just like theories, explanations that people have, and it does seem that they aren't coming from our world.
Well, that's the problem with the nuts and bolts explanation. You'd expect to find some fucking nuts and bolts.
Well, yeah,
and they haven't.
Right.
So the interdimensional one kind of solves that problem, because it's like, well, they just wish. It's the same thing with Bigfoot. They say, well, if Bigfoot's real, then why haven't we found a body? It's like, oh, because it disappears back into his own dimension, obviously.
It's really hard to argue with that. And that's why I'm sort of like, well, it could be. I really can't cross any of that out. I mean...
the problem is that explanation, that you could say anything. I could say unicorns are real, and if you don't see them, it's because they pop back into their own dimension.
And that's a reality that myself and like a lot of other people live in. It's like, yeah, you could say that. That could be true.
I mean, it definitely could, because that's the way the world is, but just the probability is so low.
But how do you know the probability is so low?
Because how we calculate probability is something like, or how I calculate probability is something like, you look at the evidence.
Okay, well, the evidence is all of these people have reported things that we can't explain.
Yeah. So do we just think that everything that's ever been reported could be true?
No, but we look at the numbers and, there seem to be a lot of them. So we can't discount all of them, surely. They can't all be crazy.
No, I don't think they are all crazy. I think this is like, we talked about this a bit in the episode about, I can't remember his name, Jonas Elrod, about that thing of like, you're either saying I'm crazy,
right,
or you're saying I'm lying,
yeah,
or I'm telling the truth. So no, that's oversimplistic. Like, obviously it's going to be somewhere in between and a mix of all those categories. Sure. But yeah, the whole demons, because I had no idea that there was a kind of a vision, an idea that the UFOs could be demons. Yeah. Until I listened to this podcast. It was called UFOs, The Last Great Days Deception, The History of UFOs, which should have tipped me off. But because I'm not into like Christianity and never have been.
As soon as you hear The Last Days.
I know. I should have known better. There's like an hour documentary about the history of UFOs. Really interesting. And just about all the history of different sightings and stuff. But then like the last 10 minutes was all just this guy preaching and trying to convert me. It was really, and then I went back and read the overview, and the blurb for this podcast was UFOs, The Last Great Days Deception seeks to equip you with the truth concerning extraterrestrial visitors and their demonic hidden agenda. After an extensive journey through the history of UFOs, check, I got that, you'll discover how UFOs lie like demons, teach like demons, travel like demons, feel like demons, act like demons, possess like demons, and deceive like demons.
So what's the answer?
The answer from these guys' perspective is they've always, like, this is just another word for demons. And this is another reason why you should be even more Christian than you were before when you started listening to the podcast.
Well, all of those abductees should have just prayed some more.
But the main explanation for a lot of the sort of things we're talking about, not necessarily like abductions and stuff, and let's do another episode on alien abductions and talk more about all that stuff. But for the like lights in the sky, like we saw at Rendlesham, well, we didn't see them, but we're seeing at Rendlesham, there's often an explanation which is pretty mundane and disappointing. It's just something it's an unidentified flying object, and often it's not even flying. Like the lighthouse wasn't flying. Like Chinese lanterns don't fly; they float. Like Venus, for example, is very bright in the sky. People could be surprised by that and think it's a UFO. It's not even a flying object; it's an orbiting object. But the most famous hoax, like the most famous historical hoax, was the New England airship hoax. So this happened in 1909, around that sort of time in February. Well, between December and February. So this guy, Wallace Tillinghast, he announced he'd invented a lighted airship and was practicing flying it at night because he was going to put it into a competition. And he didn't want people stealing his design. So this is shortly after the Wright brothers. So the idea of people putting stuff up in the sky isn't too crazy. But what he's describing, this massive ship that can move in crazy ways and it's just brilliant, that is quite extraordinary what he's claiming to be able to do. So between those dates, between December 1909 and February 1910, there are so many reports in the newspapers just from ordinary people who've seen this ship. They've definitely seen it. They report details of it. They report the lights moving around. Like there were mass sightings as well where people all saw it together. One of them was witnessed by Lovecraft, the H.P. Lovecraft, the author. He reckoned they'd misidentified the planet Venus. But there you go. Lovecraft was a skeptic. Lovecraft was an atheist, even though he set off the whole Ancient Aliens thing with his, like, a lot of what you see on the Ancient Aliens TV program is drawn straight from Lovecraft. Save that for another episode. So my point is, the idea of there being something moving around in the sky at night was out there, and then people started reporting it. And it wasn't until February when he was like, oh, actually, I didn't make that aircraft. I was just making shit up. And everyone's like, oh. And then it sort of disappears.
Right.
So all you have to do is seed the idea. A similar thing happened in 2009 when the Chinese lanterns first came on the market, and there was a huge increase in UFO sightings reported to the UK's UFO hotline. I think it's run by a guy, or was run by a guy called Nick Pope, but they had to shut it down in 2009 because they couldn't handle the amount of reports because it went up threefold. So it was sitting about 150 reports a year. It went up to 643 reports in 2009. They're like, fuck this. Can't hear any more about Chinese lanterns. We let off some Chinese lanterns whilst we were in Rendlesham.
Yeah. I didn't think they looked that convincing, but some people who we were around did. So.
Yeah, I think it's because we lit them. We were standing on the beach, and these were I especially got some, just in case you're worrying any environmentally conscious listeners out there, I got some that were eco-friendly, so the frame of them dissolves, because there was a big problem with people. We live in a seaside town, so we hear this commented all the time. The structure of the Chinese lantern was just made out of metal. Right. So it's a paper bag with a structure to keep it upright, and you light a little piece of paper at the bottom, but it fills up with hot air and it lifts up. And when they go out, that piece of metal just falls down into the sea, and then a fish gets caught and it dies. But not with the ones that I bought, because the structure dissolves. Anyway, yeah, I think because we lit them and seen them going up, obviously we know they're not UFOs. Right. They don't seem mysterious to us.
When like we get these reports of like kind of like slightly red looking lights, they do look a bit red.
Yeah.
They definitely look like, in contrast, I think there was a full-ish moon, and we saw them in contrast to that, and it looks so strange in comparison to these other lights we see in the sky. It's
really hard to tell where things are as well, distance-wise in the sky.
Yeah.
Because you have no point of reference, so you're just seeing lights. So the Chinese lanterns, they're just as bright as some of the stars. So you could think they were big and as far away as the stars, or you could think the stars were much closer.
Yeah, and then they just go out.
Yeah,
quite quickly. And
really suddenly. It could be that they're zooming away, and that's often what's described with UFOs. They zoom away super fast. They move in strange ways too, because they're just being picked up by air currents.
Yeah.
Whereas like a plane would go direct, like just in a straight line,
right?
Unless it's doing some fancy tricks. These will whisk all over the place in strange ways, which could look quite...
I think they definitely explain a lot of sightings.
Yeah. And so in the case of the Rendlesham Forest incident, I really think that the lighthouse is a good explanation we talked about earlier. But another interesting thing, so this is a guy called Ian Ridpath, and he's the guy who took the photo that I just showed you earlier of the lighthouse. He went to investigate, and he talked to forester Vince Thurkettle, who said, I reckon it's more or less definitely the lighthouse. He also said that the indentations, the mysterious triangular indentations, are rabbit diggings. They're very common. And that the rub marks that they saw on the trees that they thought were, I don't know, scorches from the UFO or something. He said, we put them there. The foresters put them there to mark trees that are going to be cut down.
Right.
So you're sort of putting all these things together. And I think this is one of the things about humans and the way we work, is we like a story that explains every single detail. And probably every detail can't be explained. And if they can, it's through boring lots of different things, sure, instead of through one handy story. But that doesn't explain why they came out in the first place, right? Because they saw lights in the sky in the first place. So the lighthouse isn't in the sky, that's moving through. It appears to be moving through the woods. But there was a meteor, and this is again from Ian Ridpath. He went and spoke to the British Astronomical Association, and they keep an eye on anything going on in the sky, as you would expect. And they say shortly before 3 a.m. on that first night, on the Boxing Day morning, I guess, on the morning of the 26th of December, there was an exceptionally brilliant meteor, almost as bright as the full moon, seen over southern England. That matches exactly the time when they were like, shit, there's something out there, let's go look. They go out there, they see the lighthouse, they're like, whoa, it's moving through. And then they see the strange rub marks, and they see the indentations, and they just put it all together into something that makes sense. Doesn't explain the strange drawings, but I think what happens with things like this is that people's memories become contaminated and people make little exaggerations. And the thing is, I've never seen a meteor shower, but I have seen strange things in the sky. One of the weirdest things I saw was, this is like in my early 20s, and I was traveling, I was in Cape Town, South Africa, and I was in a hostel, and there was a whole bunch of us standing out on a balcony of the hostel and looking out over the city towards the sea. And this is like one of those moments where everything becomes unsettled in your mind, because what you're seeing is so crazy and it makes you question everything about reality. So I really do know what these experiences feel like, at least for a moment. This white dome just rose up over Cape Town, and it looked as big as the city. Like it was huge. And it was just coming up, and everyone was seeing, everyone on the balcony was like, what is that? That is terrifying. Like, we didn't really say anything. No, because this is often what people say, that you'll egg each other on. And you're like, oh, do you think it's aliens or whatever? We didn't do anything like that. We were all just looking. And I was thinking, I was seriously running, like, is this is the day the world ends? Yeah, and there's like, I didn't know what I was looking at. It looked like another planet that come really close to us. And then it kept coming up and up and up. And as it moved out of context of the city, it was very clear that it was the moon. And it was
That's so weird.
It was so ridiculous how scary it was.
Yeah.
And then how normal it was and how silly we all felt.
It's so strange.
But this is what I was saying before about not having space references. This is kind of the opposite. You have too much perspective reference.
Yeah.
Because you can see the city. It's actually a really famous thing. It's called the moon illusion. There's a Wikipedia entry for it, and lots of people have fallen for this. It's not just me and my mates. So your brain is judging the size of the moon against the things around it, i.e. the skyline, which makes it look much bigger than it actually is. And then as it moves up to just float in the sky, it looks normal size. So this is a thing of like, I think we talked about this in another episode as well, top-down versus bottom-up perception. So bottom-up perception is what we assume we do all the time. We see lights and colours and shapes, and then we interpret them.
Right.
But what we actually do a lot of the time is top-down perception. So we have an expectation.
Yeah, I expect to see you and the microphone and the chairs are there and like everything's a normal, like I expect a certain setting.
Yeah, exactly. So when I'm out and about, if I'm staying in a house which doesn't have cats in, I'll see something small and dark in the corner of my vision. I think I've used this example before because it happens to me all the time. And I just assume it's a cat.
Yeah.
Because my brain is expecting to see cat. And when I see something small and moving around down there, I think it's cat. But it's probably it might just be someone's coat, or it could be anything. And I think that's often happening in cases like this. Like we have just a massively inflated idea of how reliable our perceptions of things are. And so I think that goes somewhat towards explaining what happened at Rendlesham.
Right.
But,
yeah, I like it.
But everyone around there seemed to think it was something to do with the government.
Speaking of which, so I mean the big, other than Rendlesham being obviously the biggest sighting of all time, there's this other one, commonly referred to as, Area 51.
Yeah, you might have heard of it.
So many believe that the remains of crashed UFO spacecrafts are stored at Area 51. This is an Air Force base about 150 miles from Las Vegas, where government scientists reverse engineer the aliens' highly advanced technology. What we do know is that the American government has developed advanced aircraft and weapons in a nearby Nellis Air Force base, including stealth bombers and reconnaissance planes. And there's a great book just called Area 51. It's a massive book written by a woman. I can't remember the name, but I've read some of it. And there is just so much information out there about this work that the government does, the American government. And so the government's official line is that the details of Area 51 are classified for purposes of national security. And people would suggest that that's only further evidence that the military is hiding aliens. The thing that kind of actually provoked this episode was hearing Bob Lazar talk about this stuff more on Joe Rogan. And this man has made his claims, I think it was, 30 years ago, 1989, and he spoke to reporter George Knapp about his work at a nearby facility called S4, which is kind of part of Area 51, but not Area 51. Apparently he worked on 9 alien spacecraft, or at least saw them, including one fueled by the atomic element 115, which you mentioned, moscovium, which was first publicly synthesized in 2003, 14 years after Lazar's claim. Pretty sure, I don't think it can produce gravity. Maybe it
no
can.
I couldn't find out, and I started trying to look into it, and I was just like, I don't understand all this sciencey words, so I gave up. But I don't think it can make gravity waves.
We're not making planes from it yet. So Lazar also said that the briefing documents he had read at the time described aliens' involvement with planet Earth over the past 10,000 years. And he claims to have degrees from both MIT and Caltech, yet neither institution has any record of his attendance. The theory is that the government have kind of tried to destroy his past, really, after he came out about this stuff.
Which is really convenient, because the explanation that there's a government cover-up looks exactly the same as the explanation that he just is making it up.
Right. Yeah, I mean, look into it. There's a documentary about it too. I think that's called Bob Lazar.
I can't remember what it's called.
I'll put a link in the show notes. But yeah, and here's a quote from him. The fact remains that there is a small autonomous group within the American government that is making decisions about what you and I are allowed to know about extraterrestrial life and humanity's interaction with it. I believe that, like 100%.
I believe that definitely the government makes decisions about what we're allowed to know.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether they'd have rulings on extraterrestrial life.
I'd look into it. I believe that like there is enough evidence to suggest that they're not ignoring these things. They are looking into it.
Yeah, there was a UFO desk in the UK government that Nick Pope ran until the Chinese lantern debacle. So they definitely are looking into it.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I mean, just how much effect recently this kind of this Bob Lazar talk has had. I don't know how connected it is, but on Facebook there was a Facebook event to storm the classified base. Over 500,000 people have joined, and this is like hashtag Storm Area 51.
So the idea is everyone just turns up at Roswell,
yeah,
at Area 51,
yeah,
and just walks in.
I have no idea what the plans are, but according to Lazar, this is a misguided idea. He says that there is no aliens or alien technology located at Area 51. The only place there was ever alien technology was at Site S4 30 years ago. And he's basically saying, the last time somebody tried to get into Area 51, they were shot. Don't do it. So there's that.
It's almost like people just want something to be, I don't know, to be righteous about, to be...
Oh yeah, we'll take anything. The internet will take anything we give it. My final theory here, my second to last theory, Men in Black. So going back to my original passion for aliens, well, Men in Black are real. They just don't seem as friendly as the ones in the film. So one example, Dr. Albert K. Bender was a well-written and extremely intelligent researcher who founded the Flying Saucer Bureau. In 1955, his research was just about to, come to some kind of grand conclusion, and he was preparing to unveil it. This paper that would prove that the US government had, to one degree or another, covered up proof of UFOs. He was visited by the Men in Black. He claims that 3 men dressed all in black visited him at his home, warned him against pursuing the topic of UFOs any further. And they basically left him scared for his life, and he shut down all of his research and the Flying Saucer Bureau.
Did these Men in Black just look like men?
Yeah.
There wasn't anything
these ones just look like men.
Otherworldly about them.
And no, because this is all like government stuff.
But people have theorized that the Men in Black are robots or aliens. I've heard that.
Well,
or clones.
They're obviously crazy. I mean, no, I didn't read that, but that's really interesting. He also said, people around him have said that he was very changed after that encounter, and his later works were rambly, almost unreadable. He seemed to live his life in constant anxiety and terror, which is pretty sad.
That's horrible.
And he purported to still receive mysterious phone calls with no one on the other end until the end of his life.
There are some mental illnesses that, I don't know off the top of my head, but that sounds like paranoia that could be associated with a mental health breakdown. Yeah, which is really sad.
But we've got another story from Dan Aykroyd.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so he's come forward with a story about how he was taping a show about the paranormal. He stepped out to make a call with Britney Spears when he noticed a black Ford was parked across the street. A tall man stepped out of the Ford and stared him down. Aykroyd turned away for a moment and then basically turned back to find that the car and the man had disappeared. After he finished that phone call, he returned to the studio to find out that his show had been cancelled and stopped filming immediately. This was a show about, like I said, the paranormal. Some people doubt his claim, but he says he knows what he saw.
Well, that sounds, I've had men look at me, get out of cars and look at me. That's happened to me.
And then did your research about UFOs get cancelled?
Well, now you mention it. But that's the thing that we do, isn't it? The other day I went into a shop to buy vegan cupcakes, and I drove out of my way to get there. And I went in and I was like, I'll have some of those cupcakes, please. And she's, brilliant. You must have seen the thing on Facebook. Because she just made a post on Facebook that they had a fresh batch in. Right. And then I'd come in asking for vegan cupcakes, and she put 2 and 2 together and assumed they were connected.
Nice.
But they were just random events. I'm not even on Facebook.
Yeah, okay.
So that thing of taking things that seem, because they appear close in time, and in your head they're connected.
Yeah.
then obviously his conclusion is, well, it must have been because of that. But actually, there could have been two completely unrelated events.
Fine. I'm not going to argue with that. A couple more. So the theory that aliens are trading information with the government. This is called the dark side hypothesis.
Oh, I like that name.
Yeah, and this is the idea that an area of land near Area 51 has been handed over to the aliens, who are allowed to abduct as many people as they want. In return,
What?
They offer their technology to the government.
That is fucked up.
I mean, I could believe that.
What, the government would just
Sell
let
us
them
out.
abduct literally as many
yeah.
as they wanted?
They want their technology.
They must have some limit on it,
fight.
though.
Come
You
on.
can abduct everyone in the whole of America.
Well, I guess it's like...
You said as many as we
for
like.
So let's say, for Moscovium, you get 20 Americans.
Okay, so it's not unlimited then, is what you're saying.
And then there's this theory that aliens are here because we're destroying the planet.
Yeah, well, that would be the Pleiadians, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And one of my favorites, I mean, this is just random, but it was in this book, Aliens, Why They Are Here. And I just remember this quote from The Matrix, which is just a really interesting perspective of what aliens, if they are out there, probably think of us. Every mammal on this planet instinctively develops a natural equilibrium with the surrounding environment, but you humans do not. You move to an area, you multiply and multiply until every natural resource is consumed. The only way you can survive is to spread to another area. There is another organism on the planet that follows the same pattern, a virus. Human beings are a disease, a cancer on this planet, you're a plague, and we're the cure. And that was Agent Smith talking to Morpheus.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of some aliens. They probably are thinking something similar.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely see why people... Maybe that's a good way to move into talking about the sort of psychological and sociological explanations for this, because we feel guilty about what we're doing. Like since we've become environmentally aware, at least, people have started to think, oh, maybe the choices we're making aren't so good, and we see the ice caps melting and climate change and all that sort of somewhere in our mind when we think about humans.
Yeah. And
you can see why we would speculate that there was someone out there judging us for it.
Yeah, for sure. It's like we create, I mean, again, we could tie that to the emergence of like traditional religions.
Yeah.
This idea that something is watching us and judging us for our bad behavior. And rather than just thinking it's ourselves judging ourselves, we create a thing.
Yeah, like we need an agent.
Yeah.
Like we feel guilt, so there must be someone shaming us.
Yeah.
And if there isn't anyone convenient, we'll just invent someone to shame us.
Yeah, it can't possibly just be our own conscience. Yeah.
In that, in the podcast, the Joe Rogan Bob Lazar podcast, which I feel has kicked off this modern interest or reignited the modern interest in UFOs, Joe Rogan said, there are two big questions. What happens when we die? And are we alone?
Yeah, I remember that. It's so true.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're grappling with. And that's why people find the whole UFO thing so interesting, especially, as you said, without traditional religion. Because those questions are answered by traditional religion. But as that's on the wane, which it is, we see like more and more people identifying as atheists or agnostic or just having no religion at all. But we still have to deal with those questions. Yeah. And the way we do it is through these different, I mean, actually many of the things we've investigated, perhaps.
Yes. Oh, yeah, definitely.
So Arthur C. Clarke famously said, 2 possibilities exist. Either we are alone in the universe or we are not. Both are equally terrifying.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah. So there's a book, I can't remember what it's called, but it's all about how, it's by a woman called Diana Poluska, maybe? She's a professor of philosophy and religion. Oh, the book's called American Cosmic, but it's exactly about this, about her theory is as traditional religion wanes, UFO belief will go up and it will become a religion in itself. And eventually we'll be, having churches, UFOs, which I think is, I mean, it's kind of speculation, but it's interesting because we see a lot of people now moving away from religion, not because they've become skeptics and, applied critical thinking to the premises of religion and decided that they don't stand up to reasonable interrogation, but because they just don't like it. Like, maybe it's homophobic, maybe it's just like not very nice to women, or it's just like old fashioned, and they stop believing, not because they've stopped being a believer, but because they don't like that flavor of belief anymore. Yeah. And then they still have all those urges, which they can just transplant onto a different subject.
For sure.
There's a thing that I noticed when I was looking at the sci-fi thing, and how that it would be really interesting to see a proper a study where you could just mark all the points of UFO history and all the points of like scientific discovery and space exploration on a map. But I feel like the way we think about ourselves as humans changed a lot when we got off our Earth. And people talk about that moment of seeing the Earth floating in space.
Yes. Yeah.
And how that changed the way they conceived of humanity. And there's a lot of really beautiful things about like how it made us realize that we're all humans, we're all together. When you're actually an astronaut up there looking down, apparently, well, they've invented a word for it even, it's called the overview effect. That shift in perception that happens. I've got a quote from Michael Collins, who's obviously on Apollo 1. He said, "The thing that really surprised me was that it, meaning Earth, projected an air of fragility. And why, I don't know to this day. I had a feeling that it's tiny, it's shiny, it's beautiful, it's home, and it's fragile." And like, I think we don't really appreciate how dramatic that getting off our own planet is to how we think about ourselves.
I'm just trying to imagine myself like floating around in a little aircraft looking down, and that does seem very like, if it makes me feel like as if I'm shaky, like as if I was on a very tall ladder, but without any ground underneath you. That's a very strange idea. We're so used to having something pulling us down, grounding us to the earth. I mean, I guess it's kind of weird being in an airplane too, if you really think about that. Yeah,
it's weird. And that thing of like looking down at the little tiny houses and they don't look real almost. It also makes me think of, I have this experience, I quite like to go to graveyards because I used to be a goth, so they feel like home to me. But it makes you realise, like, if you're worrying about how you're going to pay the rent or some other concern that you have that seems very important, of course, paying the rent is very important and very stressful if you can't do it, but that you go to a graveyard and you see all these people who lived and died whole lives before you were even born, it puts your concerns, no matter how big they are, even if they are really big, important things, in perspective of time.
Yeah.
So suddenly, instead of thinking of the present moment as being very important and very worrying, you're like, oh, this is just a present moment in this infinite expanse of time.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of the same thing, seeing the tiny planet in the infinite expanse of space.
Yeah.
It just changes your whole perspective on things.
Completely.
That's kind of like a sociological explanation for why some of the sort of concerns and worries come up that might move us to think about UFOs. But then there are individual psychological reasons, which we've kind of hinted about, mainly being about memory and how not very good it is. There was a period of time in psychology which was called the memory wars, where people were actively arguing very vociferously about what exactly memory was and how it worked. And there are a bunch of people basically saying memories are kind of like a tape recorder, and it records everything and then it gets put somewhere in your brain, and sometimes you can't access it, but it is there. And if we hypnotize you like they did with Betty and Barney Hill, regress you, you'll be able to recapture those memories and then tell them to us exactly as they happen. And then there's a whole bunch of people who are actual psychologists who are studying this, who are like, no, that's not how it works at all. Our memories are constantly getting corrupted and reworked, and every time we remember something, we re-access it and change details without knowing. And it's actually a really difficult thing to get to the bottom of what someone saw, because the very process of remembering will distort that memory, which is proven to be a really important revelation, because there are a lot of people convicted on eyewitness testimony who now we have DNA evidence because they collected DNA samples in many cases but couldn't analyze them. And when people like the Innocence Project, this project in America who fight for release of people who they think have been falsely convicted, a lot of those people were convicted on eyewitness testimony. And then when they actually got around to doing the DNA analysis, they're like, oh no, it wasn't you at all. And the person who did this crime is still out there, and we've just put an innocent person in prison for years and years and years. So the awareness that eyewitness testimony is rubbish is an important thing to be, not just in the case of UFOs. That's a minor issue compared to how much damage it can do, like the criminal justice system. I guess the other thing to consider is that we're not all the same in the way that we process information and have memories and all those things. So there was a study done by Chris French, who's kind of semi-famous in skeptic circles for investigating psychological causes behind a lot of different stuff related to the paranormal. And And they found that there were a number of individual different variables like disassociativity, absorption, fantasy proneness that are positively correlated with susceptibility to false memories and the tendency to report ostensibly paranormal experiences of all kinds. So there's a certain type of person who's more likely, they're probably the more interesting, imaginative, fun people that you like to hang out with. And they're more likely to put together these narratives in their head. So again, we said near the beginning about this false choice between someone's either lying,
right,
they're mad, or they're telling the truth. But we're all kind of lying. Whenever we make a memory, we're lying to ourselves, or we're reinventing. And we're all kind of crazy as well, because like it's not like there's this group of people who are insane and everyone else is sane. Right. We all have different levels of all these different personality traits. It's convenient to think of, oh, some people are just bonkers and we're normal. Right. But actually there's all these sort of weird stuff going on in our heads. So I think that explains quite a lot of what happened, especially in Rendlesham, where you see this adding to the story. So not on Colonel Holt's case, he stays pretty close to the original story whenever he reports it. But Jim Penniston, he first said he got within 50 feet of it, close enough to make the drawings. Then he says he got within 50 feet. Then he says I got close enough to make drawings. And this is years later. And then he said I got close enough to touch it. Then he gets close enough to touch it and see the hieroglyphics. And this is like a years intervals that he's remembering all this stuff. He went and had hypnosis. I can't find many details about this, but he went and had hypnosis. And then I think the most recent addition to his story in 2010, and I could be wrong about the dates, but somewhere around there, he now remembers, because at the time, he says, in 2010, he said, in 1980, when he touched the craft, he received this, like there was like a flash of light and he felt all weird. And then he went back to his wherever he was sleeping in the army base, and he wrote down all like ones and zeros, just like pages and pages of ones and zeros.
Wow.
And then he didn't think about that until 2010. And then it came back into his mind. He's like, oh, well, I wonder what those ones and zeros are about. And he gets out his old notebook and he gives it to some computer guy he knows. And the guy's like, that's binary code, that's ASCII, and I can decode it. And he does decode it, and he finds it's lots of numbers, which are coordinates. As you can imagine, any group of numbers could be interpreted as coordinates, because that's how groups of numbers work. And they're for different places on the earth. And there's some like garbled words in there. And from those garbled words, he interprets that this wasn't an alien craft. The Rendlesham Forest incident, we've been talking about it as if it was aliens. That's not what Jim Penniston believes now. He thinks it was time travelers from the year 8000 or something coming back. It was humans coming back to look at us.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It's amazing. It's amazing how these stories form and how the human memory works. And I have no doubt that is exactly what he remembers. But it would be so interesting to have interviewed him at different points along so you could compare the story and see how it develops.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. And
in that way, it's very, very similar to the way folktales work.
Right.
So, there's a seed of an idea. You see something weird in fact, where we were staying in Orford, in the Airbnb we stayed at, there just happened to be a book about the wild man of Orford, which is a story about a merman. So people see something strange in the water, and then you go down to the pub and you say, oh, I saw something strange in the water. I think it was a man. And then that person adds a little bit to the story and it develops like that. So, and you could see a very similar pattern happening in Jim Penniston's story, just like, I guess they're called fish stories, right? Because fishermen always exaggerate how big their fish are. So it's not really lying. It's narrativizing, maybe a little bit of embroidery, exaggeration, and you get a story that develops over the years. And other people want to get in on it. There's another guy, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's largely sort of discredited even by Jim Penniston and Holt. There's another guy who claims to have been there at the time. And he says that he saw the aliens beaming people up and down from those crafts. So it's like, this becomes a fun story that we're all taking part in and adding to.
It becomes part of our own, like the collective unconscious. Like all of these stories, all of these films, all of these interviews with these people, like it's all adding up to this like just grand story, which I mean, that I find is really fascinating.
It's amazing. Yeah, it's what I would call memes. And I think we talked about the relationship between the collective unconscious and memes before. But what's frustrating, as someone who's never really looked into the UFO thing before, is I was like, this is Britain's Roswell. This is our best, or one of our best, top in the world cases. There's going to be something here. And you start picking it apart, and it's just stories with other stories, and, you know.
Yeah, it does kind of sort of fall apart like an onion. You're just taking off these layers, and there's actually nothing inside.
Yeah. Apart from interesting speculations about human psychology.
Yeah.
Which, you know. Oh, the other thing I wanted to point out, which is, I heard this on a podcast about Rendlesham, and they kind of scoffed at it. But they were talking about the fact that it was Christmas time, and that's important. It's important because they're drunk. It's important because they're having fun. It's important because they're having time off. We talk, like, I think especially with Colonel Holt, there's a lot of talk about how credible these witnesses are, and how, but they're squaddies, right? And I grew up in a town where I knew squaddies, and they make up stuff. They play pranks. There's even a tradition of Christmas pranks, apparently, which is, I mean, military people are famous for the different pranks they pull on each other. But Christmas pranks specifically have a long history in American culture that I never heard of, but I gave it a Google and found out about it. In fact, like, Teddy Roosevelt's sons put snakes in his shoes as a prank. Yeah. Which is like a particularly cruel one. And there's more recent ones. And the government interrupts us. I don't know if you picked that up, but yeah, the government was just trying to contact us through Google on the phone.
Stop saying Google, that's the problem.
Yeah, it is. So yeah, Christmas pranks are a thing. So you've got this mixture of folktale, collective stories, you know, a kind of culture of pranking each other and playing and making up stuff, because it's very boring just being stuck on an army base, I imagine. So people want to have some fun. And drunk guys wandering out in the woods Christmas.
That's interesting. That actually feels quite possible.
Yeah. So what do you think, like, at the end of the day, do you think there's any harm in believing in UFOs?
Okay, so as we've seen from some of these cases, like, either it's these cases, the reportings are a result of somebody who is already, like, mentally disturbed, or it makes them mentally disturbed. And I can see how if I saw something, or I, like, really got into this, it wouldn't be good for my mental health. I just think, you know, it might lead to a lot of paranoia and all of this stuff. So there's that. Also, the Men in Black could come and erase your past and your memory, obviously.
That's a big risk.
And it's also, my big thing is, like, the frustration of, we probably won't work this stuff out in our lifetimes. Like, it's like, if I was to quit everything and become a UFO researcher, which part of me would like to do, it just feels so, like, hopeless. Yeah. Like, if they want to come and say hello, then they'll do it. It doesn't feel that worthwhile. At the same time, in the same way that, like, you know, we like watching science fiction films, it's like quite a fun thing to contemplate. So there is, like, a lot of fun in this and imagination. And yeah, so in terms of, like, worthwhileness, I don't think it's, like, something I would need to spend a lot more time thinking about. In terms of, like, what I'm believing now after doing more of this research, like, I still, even with all of your amazing explanations as to why all of these cases could probably be debunked, I can't believe that all of them are explainable by something here on Earth that isn't the government, or isn't, you know, something from outside of the Earth. Like, I still think there's a big possibility that some of these cases are legit.
Just because there's so many of them?
Pretty much, yeah.
But don't you think it's weird that there are so many of them, but there isn't a photo that isn't blurry, and there isn't a sample, and there isn't a craft, and there isn't a body? I'm not
judging this based on, like, hard evidence. I'm basing it really on, my thing is, like, quantity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I wonder how many reports there are of children seeing Father Christmas, for example. Just if we're looking at pure quantity. I'm just saying.
Yeah, but that's children. I mean, we're forgetting that, like, a lot of these people, they, you know, aren't mentally disturbed. They see these things. Like, I'm not, these are educated people who, like, I believe my friend, for example, who heard that whirring sound before waking up.
Yeah.
Explain why that could be.
Well, I reckon that could be exploding head syndrome, which is this weird thing. I know that sounds really crazy, but it's a thing. Give it a Google. Oh shit, I said the word again. I'm gonna get the phone excited. But so it's basically it's a bit like sleep paralysis. It's just this thing that sometimes happens where you hear a really loud sound and it sounds like it's in the outside world, and it always happens just on that brink of like the hypnagogic state where you're flipping from asleep to awake. And I can't explain it any more than that, but there are much better explanations. It could well be that, but that's the thing, and that's what's kind of frustrating looking into this stuff as a skeptic, is I can't explain everything, and I want to. And we got very excited researching Broadhaven, which is a bit of a side route in our research, which we haven't really mentioned at the moment, but it's another big UK sighting. And I was so thrilled when I got my Google Maps out and I was like, okay, there was a group of school children, they all saw a UFO. 14 school children all claimed to have seen a UFO, although only one of them will talk about it now. So kind of similar to Rendlesham in that it's impressive because there's lots of witnesses, but when you drill down to it,
right,
there's not that many witnesses. And I was looking at my Google Maps and looking at the relationship between the school playground where they were standing and the sewage works, where they have these big cigar-shaped silver things that they move sewage about in. And I was ready to get in my car and drive 5 hours to Wales and go to that sewage works and see if I could see one, because it's so exciting to have an explanation that like tidies everything up neatly. But nothing, there's always going to be stuff that can't be tidied up neatly, and that's, for someone who really wants to get to the bottom of stuff, that's insanely frustrating. And I'm finding, like, as I do more of these podcasts, getting comfortable with saying I don't know,
right,
that's the hard thing. And I think that's what ufologists generally have a problem with, because they don't want to say I don't know. They want to say aliens.
Yeah. And whereas I quite like that space. I like the fact that we can't explain everything, because that means there is a possibility. And I'm not even, like I've said, I'm not worried about actually doing the research to find out if that's true or not. It's like, I want to hang on to that possibility that those things could be real.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Whereas for you, that uncertainty is more like frustration.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable for me. And I think you're rare. I think most people find uncertainty uncomfortable. I think that's a human trait. I think I could do to learn a lot from you of being able to sit in that space and be like, okay, it's okay that I don't know. And I am getting better at it. But the thing is, like, I don't necessarily think like the UFO stuff is harmful, although the false memory stuff is. But then we're moving more into the abduction cases, which we'll treat in a separate episode. There are some people who are very creeped out by UFOs, but there are probably some people who are very comforted by the idea of the sexy space brothers.
Right. I mean, I know I am.
So I think overall, the main thing that I come away from this is being shocked at the paucity of evidence and thinking what we found here is something really important in humanity, which is, you know, I mean, this is what that guy, Sapiens, Noam Yuval Harari, said in his book. Human's most important trait is our ability to create and believe fiction. Yeah. This is what this is. This is folklore. This is fiction. And it's amazing. And it tells us a lot about ourselves. And I don't think it should be brushed aside. But I also don't think just believing it wholesale is good for people, as in the case of poor old Whitley Strieber, who seems to be suffering terribly from this. So it's a mixed bag. And it's a really interesting subject, and we'll definitely come back to it.
The truth is out there. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Let us know with a tweet or an email. We'd really love to hear about your experiences.
Yes, please tell us what we got wrong. You can email us at hello@seekerandskeptic.com and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @seekerskeptic.
You'll find the show notes for this and every episode at seekerandskeptic.com.
And if you're interested, you can find my skeptically themed comics at rebeccaonpaper.com or follow me on Twitter @RebeccaOnPaper.
And I'm at yoga_astrology on Twitter. And you can find me exploring the intersection of yoga and astrology at yogaandastrology.com.
If you liked what you heard and fancy supporting the show and spreading the word, we'd really appreciate a rating and review in the Apple Podcast Store or wherever you're listening.
Or just tell somebody you know about the show. Thanks for listening.